And a woman who held a babe against her bosom said, "Speak to us of children." And he said, "Your children are not your children. They are the sons and daughters of life's longing for itself. They come through you, but not from you. And though they are with you, yet they belong not to you. You may give them your love, but not your thoughts. You may give them your love, but not your thoughts, for they have their own thoughts. You may house their bodies, but not their souls, for their souls dwell in the house of tomorrow, which you cannot visit, not even in your dreams. You may strive to be like them, but seek not to make them like you. You may strive to be like them, but seek not to make them like you. For life goes not backwards, nor tarries with yesterday. You are the bows from which your children, as living arrows, are sent forth. The archer sees the mark upon the path of the infinite, and bends you with his might, and his arrows may go swift and go far. Let your bending in the archer's hand be for gladness. And even as he loves the arrow that flies, so he loves also the bow that is stable.
Good morning, brothers and sisters. I'm reading on the continuing of the traditions of testimony, Mark 1:9 to 11. In those days, Jesus came from Nazareth of Galilee and was baptized by John. And just as he was coming up out of the water, he saw heavens torn apart and the Spirit descending like a dove upon him. And the voice came from the heavens, "You are my Son, and the beloved. With you I am well blessed." And I pray that everybody be blessed under Jesus, and along with brothers and sisters, be blessed with love and spread the loving word.
My friends, I am honored today to have Reverend Sara Rosenau preaching. Originally, I had asked Sarah to perform the baptism, and Sarah said, "Wait, your kids are being baptized and you're still planning on preaching? You can't do that. You gotta have somebody else preach." So I'm like, "How about you?" Last week, we wrapped up the book of Ruth, and that's a story I really love. And one of the points that we were reflecting on was the women who've come before us or who've been in our lives that we wouldn't be where we are without. And Sarah is one of those women for me. Sarah introduced me to the United Church of Christ. Sarah took me on as an intern and was willing to give me a shot, and also allowed me to be the parental leave, lead minister during that time. I'm so grateful for the role that she's had in my life. When Stephanie and I were expecting Brio, our first kid, we announced it over at Waverly Heights United Church of Christ, where Sarah was. And then we went over to Cedar Hills, where I was called as associate pastor. And even though we had been over at Cedar Hills for a few months, they still organized a baby shower for us. And that has left such a deep mark on me. you know, we were gone, but we were still a part of that beloved community. Sarah, I ask all of our guests when I interview them, how would you like to introduce yourself? And so, as I invite you up, that's also my question for you to start off with.
Oh, I'm doing this. Yeah, these tech guys, they figured it out. They're going to turn this off. Awesome. It's so wonderful to be with you. It's so nice to be back here. I have been here a couple of times before. I was a ministry colleague with Pastor Don, and yeah, a lot of wonderful things have happened in this room and continue to happen. So I'm so glad to be here with you, with Giuseppe, who has been a beloved friend of mine for many years. How will I introduce myself? That's a good question. I come from the hills in the valley of Oregon, in the Willamette Valley. That's where I was born and raised. I grew up with a view of Mount Hood, or Y East, as I like to now call her. And I grew up among these trees. My people have been in Oregon for a few generations. So I have lived other places as an adult, but I've been back in these lands for the last decade or so. I have an eclectic faith background, so I come to you with elements of Quakers, United Church of Christ, a little bit of Buddhism and yoga. I have been a lover of faith traditions and religious expression for a very long time, so much so that I studied it way too long and got a doctorate in religion. But now I continue my ministry by journeying with individuals in their growth and evolution as a healer, working with people to heal. I work full-time as a mental health therapist, and I just pastor in that way, and come be with the people of God as a side gig. So I enjoy it. It's nice to be back in the pulpit today. That's how I'll introduce myself. How's that, Giuseppe?
I like it.
All right.
That's you.
That's me. I also I live in Northeast Portland, just right down the road with my children. Three children and a goofy golden doodle. So gives you a little bit more context. It certainly is my pleasure to be here. Just like Giuseppe was saying, the Amato family left me right when they had their baby. And so it's nice to be able to be back and to celebrate their children, and to welcome them into this family of faith and into a life of spiritual adventure. I wanted to talk a little bit today about baptism. Baptism is an important mark of Christian faith, and sometimes we don't really know, what does that even mean? I got together with Stephanie and Giuseppe a couple of weeks ago, and we did a little bit of talking about this. Well, I think that Christianity is kind of interesting in lots of ways, but one of the ways that it's interesting is that it, as a tradition, it takes our everyday experiences and it gives them it kind of upends them and gives them a different kind of meaning. Maybe a deeper meaning or a more pointed meaning. So water is one of those things. Water is an everyday thing, yeah? It's essential to life. We're born out of water. Water covers 71% of the earth, hopefully, still. And our bodies are made of 50 to 60% water. And our stories, many stories of our faith, stories of our in the Hebrew Scriptures and in the New Testament, sort of convey the power of water in this way. Our creation story, all life emerges out of the waters of chaos. There's dangerous water that submerges the whole earth, of which Noah's Ark becomes a kind of like boat of salvation for all living beings. Jesus, you remember, calms the storm when the disciples are afraid. So there's a power, maybe even fearfulness of water in our scriptures, but also the water of life. And baptism transmutes this power into a symbol of our faith. Baptism is often understood as the entry point into becoming a Christian. One of my professors in seminary said, and he was quoting somebody else, but some scholar of religion, who was trying to sort of pinpoint, what exactly is Christianity? What makes you a Christian? And he said, you're dipped, you're in. I mean, that was kind of like, that's something that marks Christianity, is baptism. But what does baptism really mean, I think that there's a tension theologically in our, when we start to look at baptism and what it means. And that's a tension between sin or blessing. There's a kind of a little bit of a theological tension here. And when you think about Orthodox Christianity, or kind of like one of the, there's many, many, many Christianities, many ways that Christians have interpreted their faith over the years, but some of the kind of central dominant view in a more Orthodox Christianity talks about original sin. You've heard about this? Original sin. Original sin is, it articulates humanity's fall from grace. We began in the Garden of Eden, and then Adam and Eve, kind of archetypes for humanity, had to leave the Garden of Eden, and humanity carries this curse or this sin. And then Jesus' life and death represents this change in humanity, no longer condemned by original sin. Jesus is seen as the new Adam, they say. Sometimes Mary is seen as the new Eve, but that's a different story. So then, so that's the kind of overarching Orthodox story. Okay, we're going to complicate this. Don't worry. But in the individual life of a Christian, we understand that baptism recognizes this new life that we have in Jesus. Sometimes we say the waters of baptism wash away the sin. Yeah? It's familiar to you? Maybe you resonate with it, maybe you don't. It's interesting, though, when we look at the story of Jesus' baptism that Rita read for us, it's not exactly what's happening in that story. Why was Jesus baptized at all if he is already God, already perfect, yeah? How can baptism mean washing away sin? Jesus was not sinful. So what else is going on here? Maybe, it seems to me, that the story of Jesus' baptism reveals a kind of divine blessing that God gives to Jesus. Jesus goes down into the water. His cousin John takes him down into the water. And when he comes up, The voice of the Spirit is heard. This is my beloved child in whom I am well pleased. So God bestows on Jesus this blessing. And if we want to take that also as a kind of orthodoxy, a kind of understanding of what Christianity is, then we might say that baptism marks an original blessing. Then this way of telling the story, the Garden of Eden represents the goodness of all that God has created, including humanity. John Philip Newell, who is a Celtic theologian and really he's a contemporary theologian, but he works to reclaim the understanding of Christianity that was really strongly understood by the Celts. He says, goodness is not simply a feature of life, it is the very essence of life. Also, this is in the creation story. God created, and God said, it is good. You remember? So humanity is inherently good. And we could say that we are all God's beloveds. Some say, specifically in the Celtic tradition, they say, when you look at the face of a baby, you're looking at God. You're looking at the divine image. When you look at the face of a baby, you're looking at the divine image. You see the goodness that God has given us. Well, do we have to choose between this binary of sin and evil, or sin and evil and good? Or could we understand that Christianity has a kind of both and situation going on? You know, I know that for some of us, sin and evil has been kind of like, we've been kind of hit over the head with it. And I know as a therapist that many people that I work with, you know, they take on this understanding, maybe even from their childhood, that like somehow they're broken, somehow they're not good. And then, you know, it's like what we think is what we become. So then they start to live out in their life like not being good enough. And so much, I think, of my role as a therapist is to communicate, like with my own love that I project towards people. No, you're beloved. You are beloved. There's really nothing broken about you. One of the things I often say to people, and this is kind of like one of my fundamental beliefs, this is where I go off script, Giuseppe, so you get my script, you're not going to get this. One of my fundamental beliefs is that we could say that we are like flowers. Now, a flower is not broken, right? What does a flower do? It requires some things. It requires some nutrients. It requires good soil. It requires sunlight, kind of space. And when the flower is ready, which is all about how the flower is in its essence, right? Like the timing of the blooming of the flower is all just about the flower. And when it's ready, when it has everything that it needs, and when it's ready, it blooms. There's nothing broken about a flower. And so I think of us like that. There's nothing broken about any of us. We are like flowers. If we're not blooming, maybe there's something wrong with our environment. Maybe some more environment would help us bloom. And so that's kind of the goodness side of it. And there's a lot of things wrong with the world. Not just like an opinion, but there's like suffering, yeah? There's people who do very evil things to other people, to each other. And we don't want to say that everything is good and downplay the fact that there's real suffering and that that's passed around between people. So they both seem to be kind of important. I wonder if we look at creation, just like I was looking at the flower, for a little bit more information about this, either or both and. Nature has a lot of beauty in its symmetry. It's inherently like very complex and also very beautiful. There's a kind of harmony in nature. But also, if you look at nature, if you know anything about how nature evolves, there is imperfections, you know? There are anomalies. Everything is not the same in a species, in a plant. Things change and evolve, and that happens with with imperfections, with anomalies. So it's really like our domestication of nature that tries to tame it and make it kind of perfect, you know? Trimming the lawn like this and pulling all out the things, and we've got this sort of view of things, natural things that are actually quite domesticated. Nature itself is actually pretty wild and untamable. And that's okay. Maybe that's even good. I think similarly, we could say that our imperfections don't have to condemn us. There might be something good about our wildness and our untamability, and sometimes those ways of being can impact others. We have to figure out how to live together in a new kind of harmony. But our imperfections are not a sign of God's absence. It's actually a sign of the way it is. It's a sign that evolution or that growth is here and is possible. And there's a theological term for this that I think helps to mediate between this only good or only sinful kind of binary. And that's a term called sanctification. Has anyone ever heard of it? It means sanctification means slowly over time, we are all becoming truly who we are. Slowly over time, we become more like our divine nature. Slowly over time, we become more like the belovedness that God calls us when we are born. Slowly over time, we become like the firstborn of creation, which is Christ, which is Jesus. So maybe this is a helpful way to think about baptism. Not only about the reality of sin and evil in the world, not only about our inherent goodness, both of them could be true, but baptism could be about referencing the waters of creation, referencing the waters of our birth to show that we are inherently from the divine garden and that over time we are learning and growing, and that this water is a sign of the wild adventure that we are on, a wild adventure to recognize our belovedness that is our birthright and recognize that in others. Maybe what it means to become more faithful is to be able to look at others, maybe even those who have harmed us, and see the tragedy of it, see the brokenness of it, but also see that the possibility that people can change and grow and become more like the belovedness that was named to them in their original state. So this is what I think about when I think about baptism and when I think about the scripture that we read today. That all along the way we are on a wild adventure of growth and transformation. And all along the way we are striving to emerge from the waters and hear more clearly the voice of the divine saying to us, "This is my beloved child." Amen.